What if your perfect family trip to Yellowstone turned into a mystery no one could explain?
Wow.
Imagine vanishing without a trace, only to be found 7 years later alive.
Oh,
Chills already? If you've ever faced a moment that changed your
can I have
life
another one,
forever,
please?
share it in the comments. And tell us, where are you watching this from? We love seeing our community across America and beyond. Don't scroll away. This story will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. The summer sun dipped gently over Bozeman, Montana, stretching warm light across neighborhoods that looked like they were pulled straight from a Norman Rockwell painting. Mark Miller sat on the porch of his two-story home on Maple Street, his calloused hands resting on his knees, surveying the yard he had built with pride. The white picket fence gleamed after a recent coat of paint, and the faint scent of fresh-cut grass drifted in the air. For Mark, a 42-year-old civil engineer who spent his days calculating the strength of bridges and the weight of steel, this house wasn't just shelter, it was proof that he'd achieved the American dream. Inside, laughter echoed through the halls. His wife, Laura, a 38-year-old elementary school teacher, was chasing their golden retriever Buddy, who had stolen a sock from the laundry basket. Her long brown hair swung loosely as she darted from room to room, pretending frustration but grinning the whole time. Upstairs, Anna, their 12-year-old daughter, was crouched on the floor with a brand-new digital camera in her lap, clicking the shutter at anything she could find. She had been obsessed with photography ever since Mark gave her the camera for her birthday, insisting she might as well start practicing for the wildlife shots she planned to take in Yellowstone. 9-year-old Ethan, the youngest Miller, sat cross-legged on his bed with a Boy Scout handbook spread out in front of him. He traced the pictures of knots with his finger, then tried to mimic them with a piece of rope, his small brow furrowed with concentration. Ethan loved to explore, to learn how to survive outdoors, and he was thrilled at the thought of finally showing his dad everything he'd practiced. For the Millers, the coming trip to Yellowstone National Park was more than just a vacation, it was tradition. Every August, when the warm days began to shorten and the nights carried the hint of fall, they packed up their SUV and headed 2 hours south. Yellowstone wasn't just a park to them. It was sacred ground, a place where the busy noise of modern life vanished, and the rhythm of nature, gurgling creeks, whispering pines, crackling campfires took over. Laura, at first, had been hesitant about camping. She liked clean sheets, hot showers, and the comfort of home. But over the years, she had grown to love those annual pilgrimages. She loved watching her children light up when they saw a herd of elk or a geyser erupting. She loved the evenings spent roasting marshmallows under the stars. Yellowstone had become their sanctuary. As the date drew closer, anticipation filled the house. Anna crossed off each day on the wall calendar with a big red marker. Ethan stuffed his notebook with sketches of animal tracks he hoped to identify. Laura carefully prepped meals, pre-cooking a few camping recipes so she wouldn't be stuck over a campfire for hours. Mark, ever the engineer, checked and double-checked the gear list, making sure nothing was forgotten. Water filters, first aid kits, flashlights, maps. He approached camping with the same meticulous care he used when reviewing blueprints for a bridge. On the evening before departure, the family gathered in the living room, maps spread across the coffee table. Buddy curled at their feet, tail thumping against the carpet. "Remember," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. "We stay together on all the trails. We listen to Mom and Dad. And if anyone feels tired, we speak up right away. No wandering off." Anna and Ethan nodded solemnly. They had heard these rules every summer since they were toddlers, and while they sometimes rolled their eyes, deep down they understood. Yellowstone wasn't a playground, it was wilderness. Laura reached over and squeezed Mark's hand. "We've got this. Tomorrow's going to be perfect." The next morning, the SUV was loaded by dawn. Sleeping bags, a brand new 6-person tent, coolers of food, backpacks stuffed with water bottles and snacks all packed tightly in the trunk. Buddy barked and whined as the family climbed into the car, sensing he wouldn't be coming along this time. He would stay with Laura's mother, Patricia, who always spoiled him with extra treats. The Millers pulled away from Maple Street just as the sun rose over the mountains. For a moment, Mark looked in the rearview mirror at his home, the fence, the garden, the porch swing, and felt a swell of pride. He had worked hard for all of it. Life was good. The 2-hour drive passed quickly. The kids pressed their faces to the windows as familiar landmarks appeared. The winding Gallatin River, towering lodgepole pines, and finally the iconic Yellowstone sign that welcomed visitors to America's first national park. "Here we go," Ethan shouted, pumping his fist in the air. Laura laughed. "All right, explorer, save some of that energy for the trail." They arrived at Bridge Bay Campground at 9:30 a.m., half an hour early, but the ranger at the gate waved them through with a smile. Site number 47 was waiting for them, tucked between tall pines with a peek-a-boo view of Yellowstone Lake. The air smelled of pine needles and campfire smoke, drifting from nearby sites. Mark and Ethan set to work on the tent, struggling with the new design but eventually getting the poles upright. Anna, camera in hand, documented the whole process, crouching to snap shots of her brother wrestling with a stubborn zipper. Laura organized the camp kitchen, setting out coolers and folding chairs. Within an hour, their temporary home was complete. "Dad, this tent is huge," Ethan said, diving onto his sleeping bag. "It's practically a hotel," Anna teased, snapping another picture. That evening, as the fire crackled and marshmallows turned golden brown on sticks, a friendly voice called over from the neighboring campsite. An older man with weathered skin and sharp blue eyes approached, his wife trailing behind. "Name's Bill Thompson," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Used to be a ranger here before I retired." Mark shook his hand firmly. "Mark Miller. This is Laura, Anna, and Ethan." Bill crouched by the fire, warming his hands. "You folks looking for a good hike? Everyone sticks to Old Faithful or the canyon, but I'll tell you there's a trail most people don't know about. Cascade Hollow, real wilderness. Elk, waterfalls, views you'll never forget." Anna's ears perked up. "Wildlife? Can I bring my camera?" "Best place for it." Bill nodded. "Just follow the old log bridge over the creek. Then about 5 miles in, there's an overlook that'll take your breath away." Mark's eyes lit up. He loved the idea of finding a quieter trail, away from the crowds of tourists. Ethan scribbled the name in his notebook while Laura watched, uneasy. She trusted her husband's experience, but something about following a trail not on the official map made her stomach tighten. Still, by the time they crawled into their sleeping bags that night, the Millers had decided. Tomorrow, they would explore Cascade Hollow. The stars glittered overhead, the Milky Way stretching like a river of light across the sky. Anna fell asleep clutching her camera manual, dreaming of elk and waterfalls. Ethan whispered to himself about knots and tracks, promising he'd impress his dad on the trail. Mark lay awake for a moment, listening to the steady breathing of his family around him, the soft hiss of the wind in the trees. He smiled in the dark. Life was perfect, but perfection has a way of slipping quietly into tragedy, often without warning. By morning, the campsite would be buzzing with energy again, coffee percolating, bacon sizzling, backpacks being zipped shut. The Millers would be ready for their grand adventure into Cascade Hollow. And yet, as the fire burned down to embers that night, a single gust of wind carried away the napkin on which Bill had drawn the crude map. It tumbled into the darkness, landing somewhere unseen. No one noticed. But would following that hand-drawn trail lead them to the beauty they longed for, or into the heart of Yellowstone's most haunting mystery? Morning light spilled across Bridge Bay Campground, painting the tops of the lodgepole pines gold. The air was cool and sharp, carrying that unmistakable Yellowstone scent of pine needles, damp earth, and smoke from other families' breakfast fires. Mark was already up, boiling coffee on the small camp stove. The hiss of the flame and the smell of bacon sizzling in the pan made the campsite feel alive, full of promise. Laura emerged from the tent, rubbing her eyes, pulling her jacket tight against the chill. Anna followed, her camera already dangling from her neck, while Ethan burst out with boundless energy, waving his scout's handbook in one hand and a stick in the other. "This is it," Mark said, setting tin mugs of coffee on the table. "The big hike, Cascade Hollow." Laura gave a hesitant smile. "I just hope it's not too rough. 5 miles doesn't sound bad, but the way Bill talked about it, I'm not sure what we're getting into." Ethan grinned. "Ranger Bill said there are elk, maybe even wolves. This is going to be awesome." Anna snapped a photo of her brother's eager face, then another of her dad's steady hands pouring coffee. She wanted to capture everything. Something about this trip felt important, like each picture mattered. By 7:45, backpacks were stuffed with sandwiches, granola bars, first aid kits, and extra water bottles. Laura packed rain jackets just in case, though the sky looked clear. Mark signed their name into the trail register at the Cascade Hollow trailhead. Miller family, 4 people. Expected return 2 p.m. He underlined the time carefully, a reminder of his meticulous nature. The trail began easily enough, winding through tall stands of pine. Sunlight slanted between the trees, throwing golden stripes across the dirt path. Ethan walked at his father's heels, pointing out tracks in the dust deer, rabbit, maybe even a fox. Mark nodded with pride, letting his son explain what each print meant. Anna lagged behind, crouching often to frame shots of moss-covered logs, the way light spilled through branches, the glimmer of dew still clinging to wildflowers. Laura stayed close, reminding her daughter not to fall too far back. They reached the first creek, crossing after about a mile. A fallen log had been fashioned into a simple bridge, with rope tied as makeshift handrails. The water below sparkled, about 8 feet wide, moving briskly but not dangerously. Ethan knelt to peer at fish darting beneath the surface, and Anna leaned over the edge, camera clicking furiously. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Exactly what I wanted." Mark checked his watch. "Good pace. If we keep this up, we'll reach the overlook before lunch." The family pressed on. The forest grew denser, the trail steeper. Massive fallen trees, draped in moss, lay across their path. Sunlight became rarer, patches of brightness swallowed by the canopy above. Cascade Creek's voice faded, replaced by the hush of wind and the occasional call of a raven. Laura felt at first the weight of the silence. Yellowstone was never empty. Even in remote corners, you could usually hear other hikers, distant laughter, or the echo of footsteps. Here, there was only forest. "Feels like we're the only people on Earth," she murmured. Mark smiled. "That's what makes it special." But in the back of Laura's mind, unease curled. She couldn't explain it, but something about being so far from the crowds, so deep in shadowy woods, tugged at her nerves. Around 10:20 a.m., it happened. They had just climbed over a massive fallen pine, roots clawing upward like frozen tentacles, when Anna suddenly stopped. "Wait," she called out. "I think I dropped my lens cap back there." Laura sighed. "How far?" "Just past that big tree. I took it off to clean my lens and thought I put it in my pocket, but it's gone." Mark glanced ahead. "All right. Ethan and I will go a little farther. You two find it and meet us at the next trail marker." He said it casually, almost like an afterthought, as if they had done this 100 times before. He tightened his pack straps, nodded at his wife, and moved on with Ethan close behind. Laura hesitated. They had always agreed never to split up. But the lens cap was important to Anna, and they could still hear Mark and Ethan's voices as they walked. It seemed safe. 5 minutes later, Anna spotted the black plastic cap wedged between 2 rocks. She snatched it up with relief. "Got it." Good," Laura said. "Now let's catch up to your dad." They hurried back along the trail, but when they reached the spot where Mark and Ethan had gone ahead, the forest was silent. No voices, no footsteps. No laughter. "Mark," Laura called, her voice echoing between the trees. "Ethan?" "Nothing." "Maybe they went farther," Anna whispered, glancing nervously at her mother. They walked faster, then slower, then stopped altogether. The trail forked in several directions, none of which matched the crude sketch Bill had drawn. Laura's stomach dropped. She called again, louder. "Mark, Ethan." Still, only silence. They walked 10 minutes, then 20. Every bend in the path promised to reveal 2 familiar figures waiting up ahead. Every bend was empty. Laura checked her phone, though she already knew what she'd see. No signal. Her voice grew sharper now, tinged with panic. "Mark." Anna clutched her camera like a lifeline. "Mom, where are they?" Laura forced a steady tone she didn't feel. "They're just ahead. We'll find them." But her chest ached with fear. Mark was no novice. He had hiked these mountains before. He knew better than to vanish. Clouds began gathering. The forest grew darker, the air heavy. At 2 p.m., the exact time Mark had written down in the register, they should have been back at the car. Instead, Laura and Anna were lost in a maze of unmarked paths, calling into a void that offered no reply. When the first rumble of thunder rolled overhead, Laura made the hardest decision of her life. She pulled her daughter close. "We're going back to the trailhead. We'll get help." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "But what about Dad and Ethan?" "They're smart," Laura said, though her voice cracked. "They'll find shelter. We'll bring help to them." Oh. The storm broke, rain drenching them within minutes, turning the trail to mud. Laura gripped her daughter's hand, guiding her step by step, praying silently, begging God to keep Mark and Ethan safe. It took nearly 2 hours to retrace their steps. When the ranger station finally came into view, Laura stumbled inside, soaked and shaking, Anna clinging to her side. "My husband and son are missing," she gasped. "We were on Cascade Hollow Trail. We split up for just a few minutes, and they're gone. Please, you have to help us." Ranger Jennifer Martinez looked into Laura's eyes and saw raw terror. She radioed immediately for backup. Within the hour, the largest search and rescue operation Yellowstone had seen in years was underway. Dogs sniffed for scent. Volunteers gathered. Helicopters scanned the forest. The news began to spread. But as night fell and rain hammered the roofs of tents, one fact became chillingly clear. Mark and Ethan Miller had vanished. No tracks, no gear, no signal fires. It was as if the father and son had simply stepped off the trail and disappeared into thin air. And Yellowstone, vast and ancient, had swallowed them whole. That night, as Laura sat awake in the ranger station, clutching Anna's damp jacket, she repeated one phrase over and over. "They'll be back. They'll be back." But when the search dogs returned at dawn, their noses pressed to the soil, every trail ended in the same place, that fallen tree. Beyond it, nothing. Not a broken branch, not a footprint, not even a hint of direction. It was as if Mark and Ethan had been lifted into the sky. And the question whispered through the camp like a ghost. How does a father and son vanish in the middle of a marked trail with no trace at all? The morning of the 15th of August, 2018, began crisp and clear, the kind of summer morning campers dream about. The Millers woke to the smell of pine needles warming in the sun and the soft calls of birds darting through the trees. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the sky an unbroken blue, the air fresh and cool. Mark was the first out of the tent, stretching his arms and inhaling deeply. He was a man who thrived in order and plans, and today was mapped perfectly in his mind. Cascade Hollow, 5 miles, moderate terrain, an overlook at the halfway point, and back by 2 o'clock sharp, a neat loop. Laura emerged next, pulling on her fleece jacket. She studied her husband's face as he adjusted his backpack straps, full of that quiet excitement he always carried when they camped. A part of her wanted to ask again if they shouldn't just stick to the more familiar trails, the ones that filled with tourists and families with strollers. But she stayed quiet. Mark had prepared for this. He always prepared. Anna slung her camera around her neck, her eyes already darting to the way light streaked through the trees. She wanted to catch every detail, the way Buddy had barked when they left him behind, the map spread out on the coffee table the night before, her father's grin when he heard about Cascade Hollow. She wanted her lens to remember what her heart already knew, that this trip mattered. Ethan practically bounced with energy, rope coiled around his shoulder like a miniature explorer. "Dad, if we see elk tracks, can I sketch them? Maybe even follow them a little?" "We'll see," Mark said, though his tone was firm. "But remember the rules. No wandering off, not even a step." At 7:45, they left the campsite and drove to the trailhead. Mark signed the register with careful penmanship. Miller family. 4 hikers. Return time. 2 p.m. He underlined it twice. The first mile of Cascade Hollow felt almost magical. Sunlight glittered through tall lodgepole pines, dappling the earth in shifting patterns. The air smelled faintly of wet moss. The trail itself, narrow but well-worn, curved gently along the creek. Water rushed over smooth stones, a silver ribbon cutting through green. Ethan led the way for a while, pointing at tracks in the dirt. "See? Deer. And that one rabbit." Mark nodded proudly. "Good eye. Remember what I taught you. Always look for broken twigs or flattened grass. Animals leave signs if you know how to read them." Laura smiled at the sight of father and son, their heads bent together, their bond solid and bright. She slowed her pace, letting Anna lag behind with her camera. The shutter clicked repeatedly rocks, the reflection of trees in the creek, a spider web catching dew. When they reached the log bridge, they paused. It stretched across a lively current about 8 feet wide, water sparkling as it hurried downstream. The makeshift handrails were rope, frayed but still sturdy. Ethan balanced himself carefully, arms spread, laughing at his own daring. Anna leaned low to photograph the water's rush, capturing the spray as it leapt against stones. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Laura murmured. "It's perfect," Anna whispered, snapping one more picture. By 10 a.m., they had covered nearly 2 miles. Mark checked his watch and nodded, satisfied with their pace. "We'll make the overlook easy," he said. That was when the forest began to change. The trail pulled away from the creek, climbing into thicker trees. The air cooled noticeably, sunlight blocked by an interlocking canopy. Moss clung to every surface. Fallen giants lay across the path, forcing the millers to clamber carefully over them. The silence here was heavy, pressing against their ears. Anna fell behind again, crouching to adjust her camera lens. She tugged the cap off, wiped the glass carefully with a cloth, and slipped the cap into her pocket. Or so she thought. 10 minutes later, as they cleared a massive fallen pine with roots twisting skyward like frozen claws, she stopped short. "Wait," she called. "My lens cap, I dropped it." Laura turned back. "How far?" "Just past that big tree, I think. I had it a minute ago." Mark glanced at his wife. "All right. You and Anna go get it. Ethan and I will push ahead to the next trail marker. Meet us there." It was said so casually, almost ordinary. Families split up for a few minutes all the time. The rules felt less strict when the day was sunny, the air cool, the path firm beneath their feet. Laura hesitated. Something in her gut told her no. But she saw Anna's anxious face. Her daughter hated losing even the smallest piece of her gear, and she relented. "Fine. We'll be quick." Mark gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll wait for you." So Laura and Anna turned back. It took only a few minutes to find the lens cap, wedged between 2 rocks near the mossy log. Anna snatched it up with relief, holding it like a treasure. "Got it!" "Good," Laura said. "Let's catch up." They hurried forward, hearts light again. But when they reached the place where Mark and Ethan should have been waiting, the trail stretched empty ahead. "Mark?" Laura called. Her voice bounced back, hollow. "Ethan?" No answer. "They must have gone farther," Anna said, though her voice trembled. "Maybe." Laura tried to steady herself. "Let's just keep moving." They walked faster. 10 minutes. 15. Still no sign of father or son. The trail forked suddenly, splitting into 3 directions. None were marked. Laura froze. Bill's map, just a scribbled napkin, had shown nothing about forks. "This isn't right," she whispered. She shouted again, louder this time, her voice breaking. "Mark! Ethan!" Only the trees answered, rustling faintly in the breeze. Anna clutched her camera so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Mom! Where are they?" Laura swallowed her panic. "They're ahead. We'll find them." But inside, fear was clawing its way up her throat. The minutes stretched. The silence deepened. Every rustle in the undergrowth made them spin around. Still nothing. At 2 p.m., the time Mark had underlined, Laura checked her watch. They should have been back at the car. Instead, she and Anna were stranded, hearts pounding, lost in a maze of shadowed trails. Then thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm Bill had warned about was rolling in. Laura gripped her daughter's hand. "We're turning back. Now." "But Dad and Ethan." "They'll find shelter," Laura said, forcing the words out. "We'll get help." The rain came fast, soaking them within minutes. Mud clung to their boots, the trail slippery and treacherous. Branches whipped at their faces. Laura stumbled but pulled Anna along, step after desperate step, whispering prayers through clenched teeth. By 5:20 p.m., they reached the trailhead, drenched, shivering, voices raw from shouting names into the storm. Laura drove straight to the ranger station at Bridge Bay, bursting through the door, Anna right behind her. "My husband and son are missing," she gasped, voice breaking. "Cascade Hollow Trail. We split up for just a few minutes, and they're gone. Please, please, you have to find them." Ranger Jennifer Martinez stood frozen for only a moment before moving with crisp authority. Radios crackled. Teams were summoned. Within 30 minutes, the largest search operation in recent memory was underway. That night, powerful beams of light cut through the trees. Searchers shouted Mark's name. Dogs sniffed the trail. Helicopters hovered overhead, and Laura sat in the ranger station, holding her daughter close, whispering again and again, "They'll come back. They'll come back." But the dogs lost the trail at the fallen tree. Every time, without fail, the scent ended there, sudden, inexplicable, as if father and son had simply evaporated. Reporters began arriving the next morning, cameras flashing, headlines blared. "Family vanishes in Yellowstone." Neighbors back in Bozeman prayed and lit candles. Laura's mother, Patricia, drove down, her face drawn with worry. The search stretched into days. Dozens of miles scoured, volunteers poured in, still no trace. By the 9th day, the unthinkable happened. Ranger Mike Thompson, head of SAR, announced the active search would be suspended. Too dangerous, too costly, too little hope. Laura collapsed into Patricia's arms. Anna sobbed into her mother's shirt, her camera hanging useless around her neck. And Yellowstone, vast and untamed, kept its silence. Nights grew colder. The campground emptied. Reporters packed their vans and left. But for Laura and Anna, the world had stopped. Still, questions haunted everyone. How does an experienced hiker vanish mid-trail? How does a boy leave no trace? At the fallen tree where the scent ended, Bill Thompson returned again and again, staring at the mossy bark as though it hid a secret. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. And whispers spread through the community, chilling in their simplicity. It was like the forest took them. The first 48 hours after Mark and Ethan disappeared were a blur of movement, voices, and questions that never seemed to stop. Laura barely remembered sleeping, if she had at all. She remembered standing in the ranger station, watching strangers in uniforms lean over maps spread across tables, their fingers tracing trails and ridges, trying to make sense of the impossible. Anna sat in a folding chair beside her, clutching her camera to her chest like it was a lifeline. Every so often, she whispered her brother's name as if the sound alone could pull him back. Ranger Jennifer Martinez remained steady, her calm voice grounding Laura when panic threatened to consume her. "We'll start again at first light," she promised. "We've got teams coming in from Cody and Jackson. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers. We won't stop." At dawn, the search began in earnest. Helicopter blades thundered overhead, whipping up dust and pine needles as they lifted off to scan the backcountry. Searchers in bright jackets formed lines across the forest floor, calling Mark's name, calling Ethan's, their voices rising and falling like echoes swallowed by the wilderness. The dogs worked tirelessly, their noses pressed to the ground, handlers urging them on. Every time the result was the same. The scent led to the fallen tree and ended. Reporters arrived by noon, camera crews set up near the ranger station, their lenses pointed at the weary volunteers, the helicopters coming and going, the family that had been ripped apart. Laura hated them for it. She hated the way they whispered and speculated, turning her nightmare into a story for strangers to consume. But she also understood. People cared, people wanted answers, and maybe, just maybe, someone watching from home might know something that could help. The first night, Laura lay awake on a cot in the ranger station. Anna curled beside her. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the radio's crackle with static and clipped voices. At 3 a.m, a volunteer came in with 2 styrofoam cups of coffee. "It's cold out there," he said softly. "We're still looking." Laura could only nod. Words had abandoned her. By the 3rd day, the search had grown massive. Volunteers from Bozeman, Livingston, and even Billings poured in. Some were old friends of Mark's from the Department of Transportation. Others were strangers moved by the story of a missing father and son. They combed through canyons, waded across creeks, checked caves, and old ranger cabins. Nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no scraps of food wrappers or dropped water bottles. The forest gave back nothing. Laura tried to join the search, but Martinez gently refused. "You need to stay close," she said, "for Anna, and in case we need you." So Laura waited. Waiting was worse than moving. She watched the sun rise, climb high, and sink again. She watched teams return, their faces drawn, shaking their heads. She watched Anna withdraw into silence, her camera hanging limp at her side, her eyes vacant. By the fifth day, hope began to fracture. Some of the volunteers spoke quietly in corners about mountain lions, about falls into unseen ravines, about the way wilderness could swallow a person whole. Laura overheard one man say, "It's like the earth opened and ate them." She wanted to scream at him, to shout that Mark was too experienced, that Ethan was too careful, that families didn't just vanish. But she said nothing. Her voice had grown hoarse from calling their names into the forest. On the seventh day, the National Guard joined the effort. Their helicopters flew grid patterns over the park, heat sensors sweeping the valleys. But the wilderness was endless, a patchwork of ridges, canyons, and forest, so thick the sensors struggled to penetrate. By the ninth day, the official word came. Mike Thompson, the search coordinator, stood before a cluster of cameras and reporters, his face carved with exhaustion. Laura stood just behind him, Anna clinging to her hand. "We've searched over 50 square miles," Thompson said. "We've used helicopters, dogs, ground teams, and every resource available. We found no evidence of Mark or Ethan Miller's whereabouts. At this time, we have no choice but to suspend the active search." The words fell like stones into the silence that followed. Laura felt her knees buckle. Patricia caught her before she hit the ground. Anna buried her face in her mother's shirt and sobbed. The reporters swarmed with questions. How could two people vanish without a trace? Were there theories? Was foul play suspected? Thompson repeated the same line. No evidence, no trace. The cameras clicked, capturing Laura's grief, her hollow eyes, the way she clung to her daughter like a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. When the searchers packed up their gear and left, the campground felt unbearable. The world went on. Families cooked hot dogs, children rode bikes, tourists pointed cameras at geysers, while Laura and Anna's world had ended. Back in Bozeman, the house on Maple Street felt like a museum of the life they'd lost. Ethan's baseball glove sat on the counter. Mark's reading glasses rested on the arm of his chair. The smell of his aftershave still lingered in the bathroom. Bailey, their golden retriever, sat by the front door for hours, whining softly, waiting for footsteps that never came. Laura couldn't bring herself to cook meals. She lived on coffee and toast. Patricia moved in to help, guiding Anna through her homework, making sure she ate something. But Laura existed in a fog, caught between despair and denial. Friends dropped off casseroles, flowers, cards. Neighbors knocked with tears in their eyes, offering hugs and prayers. But none of it could fill the silence that echoed through every room. Anna stopped taking pictures. Her camera gathered dust on her desk. When her school counselor asked how she was doing, she whispered, "If I hadn't dropped my lens cap, they'd still be here." Laura's heart shattered at those words. She tried to explain to her daughter that it wasn't her fault, that sometimes life twists cruelly, but Anna's guilt was carved deep. On the one-year anniversary, reporters came again. They asked the same questions, took the same photos, stirred the same ache. Laura lit a candle at the Cascade Hollow trailhead, placing flowers where her family had last stood together. She whispered Mark's name, Ethan's, and she walked away with nothing but silence. Year after year, the ritual repeated. Flowers at the trailhead, questions from reporters, whispers from strangers who speculated about what might have happened. Some believed it was a wild animal. Others thought Mark had led Ethan off trail deliberately, for reasons too dark to imagine. Internet forums brimmed with theories, UFOs, secret government programs, native spirits guarding sacred ground. Laura stopped reading them after the first few years. But even in the face of silence, She never stopped hoping. Anna grew taller, her features sharpening into a young woman's. She started high school, then college. She began taking photos again, but only of people faces lined with age, eyes heavy with stories. She avoided landscapes, avoided forests. Laura sold the Maple Street house eventually, unable to walk past Mark's chair one more time. She and Anna moved into a smaller apartment across town, closer to Patricia. Bailey passed away in 2018, and that loss reopened every wound. Life moved on, even when Laura wanted it to freeze. Seasons turned. Snow blanketed the mountains. Summer sun returned. Still no trace. 7 years passed. 7 anniversaries marked by candles and flowers, by tears and silence. Until one ordinary August morning in 2023, everything changed. Ranger Marcus Webb was on routine patrol deep in Yellowstone, miles from Cascade Hollow. He paused on his ATV, pulling off his helmet to listen. At first he thought it was the wind, or birds, or the rushing of water. But then he heard it again, high, clear voices drifting through the canyon. Children singing. He froze, his heart hammering. He keyed his radio. "Base, this is Webb. I'm at coordinates 44.1892, negative 110.0547. I'm hearing what sounds like children singing, requesting backup." The voice on the other end crackled, stunned. "Children? Out there?" Webb's hands tightened on the radio. Yes, children. The sound faded, swallowed by the wilderness. But it had been real, too real. And for the first time in 7 years, Yellowstone was ready to whisper its secret. Marcus Webb was a ranger who'd seen nearly everything Yellowstone could throw at a person: tourists burned by geysers they shouldn't have touched, bears rummaging through cars, hikers who thought flip-flops counted as proper footwear. But nothing in his 15 years of service prepared him for what he heard that morning. Children's voices. Singing. He stood still in the pine-shaded canyon, helmet tucked under his arm, heart pounding so loudly he almost drowned out the sound itself. It wasn't the shriek of an animal or the eerie whistle of wind funneled through stone. These were words, melodies, human voices. And they were young. The singing lasted maybe 30 seconds, faint and haunting, like a chorus of ghosts. Then it stopped, leaving only the hum of insects and the distant trickle of water. Webb swallowed hard, keyed his radio, and called in the coordinates. His voice shook despite every effort to keep it steady. "Children," he repeated when the dispatcher asked for confirmation. "I heard children singing out here, and there shouldn't be kids within 50 miles of this canyon." The line was silent for a beat. Then, "Copy that, Ranger Webb. Stay put. Back up en route." By noon, 4 rangers joined him, including Jennifer Martinez, now district supervisor. She recognized Webb's expression immediately: the pale face, the wide eyes, the mix of disbelief and certainty. She'd worn that same look 7 years ago when Laura Miller had stumbled into her station soaked to the bone, begging someone to find her husband and son. "Show us where you heard it," Martinez said. The group hiked cautiously, boots crunching over pine needles, radios crackling softly at their hips. The canyon sloped steeply, forcing them to push through thick underbrush and scramble down loose rocks. GPS signals flickered in and out beneath the dense canopy. It was a place where sound played tricks, where echoes doubled and bounced, where you could never quite tell what direction a noise came from. At 2:30 p.m. they heard it again. Clearer this time. 2 voices, young, weaving in and out of harmony. The melody was old, almost familiar. A campfire song. Martinez froze. "My God," she whispered. "Hello?" Webb called. His voice carried into the canyon. "Yellowstone Park Rangers, can you hear us?" The singing stopped. Silence descended so suddenly the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, after a long moment, came a voice. High, tentative, unmistakably human. "Are you real Rangers?" The hair on Martinez's arms rose. She stepped forward, heart hammering. "Yes, we're Rangers. My name is Jennifer Martinez. We're here to help you. Are you hurt? Do you need medical assistance?" The voice came again, closer now. "We're okay. But we've been waiting a long time. Are our families still looking for us? The Rangers exchanged stunned glances. Martinez gestured for the team to spread out slowly, carefully. You couldn't spook someone after years in the wilderness. Trauma made people fragile. Through the trees ahead, shapes began to emerge. At first, the Rangers thought their eyes deceived them. A structure stood there, half hidden against a rock face, a shelter of logs fitted together, sealed with mud and moss. Smoke curled faintly from a camouflaged vent. Nearby, patches of earth had been cleared into small gardens, leafy plants pushing up in neat rows. And standing at the entrance, staring with wide eyes, were two figures. Young men. Thin, bearded, hair falling past their shoulders. Their clothes were crude, stitched from scraps of fabric and animal hide. Yet their posture was strong, their eyes bright. One stepped forward, his voice trembling. I'm Jacob Miller. Martinez's throat closed. She had to force the words out. Jacob Miller? From Bozeman? The boy nodded. Yes, ma'am. His eyes filled with tears. This is my dad. From the shadow of the shelter, another figure emerged. A man, older now, his beard gray, his face weathered like leather. He moved with the steady gait of someone who'd lived on his feet for years. His eyes scanned the Rangers' faces as though afraid they might vanish if he blinked. I'm Mark Miller, he said softly. My wife and daughter, they made it out, didn't they? Please tell me they're safe. Martinez's own vision blurred. She remembered Laura clutching Anna's jacket, her voice breaking as she begged for help. She swallowed hard. Yes, they're safe. They've been waiting for you. Mark closed his eyes. His shoulders sagged with relief so deep it nearly dropped him to his knees. But then, another movement. A smaller shape appeared beside him. A girl. No older than 10 or 11, with dark hair and wary eyes. Her clothes hung loose on her thin frame, patched and stitched like the others. This is Lily, Jacob said. We found her. Martinez blinked. Found her? Mark nodded. His voice was low, steady, but full of something heavy. She was lost in 2019. A family camping near the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. We heard her cries one night. We couldn't just leave her. Oh. The Rangers stood frozen. Everyone remembered that case. Lily Chen, she'd wandered from her family's campsite 4 years ago. Search teams scoured the area for weeks. Nothing. Everyone assumed the worst. And here she was, alive. The team approached slowly, speaking gently, offering water, radios, reassurance. Mark kept glancing over his shoulder, protective, as though expecting the wilderness itself to snatch them back. You don't understand, he said. We tried. At first we thought rescue would come. We heard helicopters for weeks. But Jacob broke his leg that first week, compound fracture. I said it the best I could, but he couldn't walk more than a few yards for months. By the time he healed, we'd built a life here. We thought it was safer to stay put, to wait for help. 7 years, Martinez whispered. Mark's gaze darkened. We never gave up hope. We told ourselves every night, one day the Rangers will come. Jacob's eyes shone. Dad always said if we stayed alive, stayed together, someone would find us. Lily stepped forward timidly, clutching a crude doll made of twine. We sing every day, so we don't forget what it feels like. The words lodged in Webb's chest. The singing that was what had drawn him here. The Rangers documented everything, radioing for medics and backup. The shelter was photographed, its ingenuity astounding. A smoke dispersal system hidden in the rocks, rainwater collection barrels, traps and drying racks for meat. It was a homestead built not by choice, but by necessity, and it had kept 3 children and a man alive far longer than anyone thought possible. By evening, a helicopter hovered overhead, blades rattling the canyon. But extracting the group wouldn't be easy. The meadow nearby would have to be cleared for a landing. Chainsaws buzzed as crews worked frantically, daylight fading fast. Mark stood with his arm around Jacob, watching the preparations. His face was both full of relief and shadowed with something unspoken. They don't know what we've seen, he murmured to Martinez. What do you mean? She asked. Mark hesitated, then shook his head. Later, for now, just get us out of here. By the next morning, the helicopter lifted off, carrying 4 figures who'd been declared lost, presumed dead. Laura Miller's phone rang in Bozeman. When she answered and heard the words, she dropped to her knees. Anna, now 19, grabbed the phone from her mother, tears streaming as she listened. "They're alive," Laura whispered. "My God, they're alive." The reunion was arranged carefully, counselors on hand, medical staff prepared. But as Laura and Anna stood in the hospital corridor waiting, their hearts racing, one thought pierced through the joy, sharp and cold. If Mark and Jacob had survived 7 years in the wild, what exactly had kept them there? When the hospital door finally opened and Laura saw her husband step into the light, gaunt but alive, she almost collapsed with relief. Jacob followed, taller now, bearded, eyes burning with a depth no teenager should carry, and then Lily, fragile yet fierce. They embraced, sobbing, clinging, the cameras outside clicking furiously. But later that night, as Mark sat in his hospital bed, his voice low so no one else could hear, he whispered to Laura words that made her blood run cold. "There are things out there we can't explain. Things we were never supposed to see. And if they know we're back, they won't stop watching us." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and humming machines, but to Laura and Anna, it smelled like salvation. They stood in the corridor outside room 314, hearts racing, unable to believe what was about to happen. For 7 years, every anniversary had been marked by flowers at Cascade Hollow, by silence, by aching questions that had no answers. And now, suddenly, impossibly, those answers were on the other side of a door. The nurse pushed it open. Mark Miller stepped into view first, gaunt, his beard gray and wild, his skin tanned and weathered like leather left too long in the Sunday, but his eyes were Mark's. When they met Laura's, something broke inside her, and she ran forward. They collided, arms wrapping so tight it was as if they feared the other might disappear again. Laura sobbed into his chest, whispering his name over and over. "Mark, Mark, I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't," he murmured, his voice raw. "I never stopped thinking about you, about Anna." Anna stood frozen, tears sliding down her cheeks. And then Jacob appeared behind his father. Taller than she remembered, broader, but with the same lopsided smile that used to light up baseball fields and backyards. His beard couldn't hide the boy she had lost. "Anna," he said softly, voice breaking. She launched herself into his arms. They clung together, weeping. Both children, no longer children, both carrying scars no one else could see. And then came Lily, small, frail, her dark hair falling in uneven layers around her face. She hovered by the doorway, unsure, holding the twine doll she had carried out of the canyon. Laura turned, her heart twisting. "Sweetheart," she whispered. She bent to her knees, opening her arms. "Come here." Lily hesitated, then stepped forward. Laura gathered her close, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. You're safe." And the reunion filled the room with sobs and laughter, with words tumbling over each other, stories of survival, of prayers whispered in the dark, of hope that had never died. Reporters outside clamored for pictures, but hospital staff held them back. This moment belonged to the family. Later, when the first flood of emotion eased, doctors began their examinations. Jacob's leg showed signs of an improperly healed fracture, but no infection. Lily was underweight but otherwise healthy. Mark carried vitamin deficiencies and muscle strain, but his heart was strong, his mind clear. "How did you do it?" a nurse asked in awe. Mark smiled faintly. "One day at a time." But beneath the surface of his words lay something heavier, something unsaid. That night, when the hospital lights dimmed, and Anna finally drifted to sleep, curled on a cot beside Jacob, Laura sat with Mark in the quiet. "You saved them," she whispered. "You kept them alive." Mark looked down at his hands. "I did what I had to. But Laura," his voice cracked, "you need to know it wasn't just luck. There were things in that canyon. Things we saw. Things I can't explain." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, eyes shadowed. "Not yet. You've waited 7 years for me. Give me a little more time to find the right words." The next day, counselors arrived, trained in family reunification after long separations. They explained that joy and shock often tangled together, that adjustment could be harder than anyone imagined. Laura nodded, but all she felt was gratitude. Anna hovered near Jacob constantly, peppering him with questions. Do you remember my 13th birthday? Do you remember Buddy? Do you remember when we watched The Lion King 20 times in a row? Jacob laughed, the sound rusty but warm. I remember all of it. I thought about it every night. That's what kept me going. 1. Lily was quieter. She sat at the window watching cars pull into the parking lot, as if trying to memorize this new world. When a nurse handed her a juice box, she stared at it like it was magic. Laura sat beside her. Sweetheart, your parents, they've been looking for you. We'll call them soon. Lily nodded slowly, but her eyes clouded. I don't remember them very well. I only remember the canyon. Jacob and Mr. Miller. They're my family. Laura's throat tightened. How could a child explain 4 years of wilderness life? How could any of them? By the third day, the media storm became impossible to contain. National networks swarmed outside the hospital, headlines flashing across screens. Miller family found alive after 7 years. Miracle in Yellowstone. Lost girl Lily Chen discovered. Laura gave no statements. Neither did Anna. Mark sat with his back to the window, hands clenched, gaze distant. At night he finally spoke. They'll want to know how we did it, he said. They'll want every detail. But there are things I can't tell them. Things no one would believe. Laura touched his arm. Mark, you're safe now. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. His eyes flickered. Safe, he repeated. That's what I want to believe. But in the quiet moments, Jacob startled at loud noises, his hand tightening on the edge of the bed as if bracing for something unseen. Lily hummed to herself constantly, the same campfire tune Webb had heard in the canyon. She sang it at dawn, at meals, before sleep. When Laura asked why, Lily's answer chilled her. If I stop singing, it gets too quiet, and when it's quiet, I can still hear them. Laura frowned. Hear who, sweetheart? Lily's eyes grew wide. The people in the trees. The room fell silent. Laura swallowed hard, forcing a smile she didn't feel. You're safe now, she whispered again, but the words felt thinner this time, stretched against something larger than she understood. On the 4th night, long after Anna and Jacob had fallen asleep, Mark reached for Laura's hand. His grip was firm, his gaze fierce. You need to prepare yourself, he said softly. Because everything you thought you knew about why we vanished, it's not the truth. We didn't just get lost, Laura. We weren't alone out there. Laura's breath caught. She searched his face, but his eyes were unyielding, full of secrets she wasn't ready to hear. Not alone, she whispered. Mark nodded once, his voice breaking. They were watching us, every step, every year. And now, I think they know we're back. The days that followed the reunion blurred together for Laura. Relief and exhaustion tangled into a haze, but beneath the joy, something darker pulsed. Mark was alive, Jacob was home. Lily was safe, but none of them were the same. They smiled when the cameras flashed, but behind closed doors, shadows lingered. Mark startled at the sound of squeaking gurney wheels in the hospital hallway. Jacob avoided mirrors, his gaze flickering away as though afraid of what he might see reflected back. And Lily sweet, small Lily sang constantly, as though silence itself was an enemy. Laura tried to focus on the miracle, but the unease grew heavier by the day. On the 5th night, Mark finally began to speak. They sat together in the dim hospital room, blinds drawn against the flashing bulbs of reporters outside. Anna slept curled up in the chair, Jacob's arm draped protectively around her shoulders. Lily hummed in her sleep on the cot beside them, her doll clutched tight. Mark's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. You know the story they'll want to hear, he began. The survival tale, the garden, the smoke vents, the way we rationed food. And that's all true, but it's not the whole truth. Laura's pulse quickened. Then what is? He rubbed his hands together, as though trying to warm them. That first week, after we got separated, I thought I could backtrack. I thought if I followed the creek, I'd hit a trail or find a ranger. But something happened. Jacob fell compound fracture. I couldn't carry him out. We were stuck. Laura's heart ached at the thought. You did what you had to. Mark shook his head. You don't understand. The first night we stayed by the fallen tree, we weren't alone. We heard voices. Laura frowned. Other hikers? No. His eyes darkened. Not hikers, not campers. Voices too close, too deliberate. They called Jacob's name. In the dark. A chill rippled through Laura. Are you saying? I'm saying we weren't just lost. We were being watched. He fell silent, his gaze distant, as if reliving the moment. Jacob stirred then, half awake, his voice hoarse. Dad's right. His eyes glistened in the dim light. I heard them too. At first I thought it was Mom calling for me. But when I called back, nothing answered, just laughter, way out in the trees. Laura's chest tightened. She wanted to dismiss it as trauma, the tricks of an exhausted mind in a dark forest. But Jacob's trembling hands told her otherwise. What about Lily? She asked. Mark nodded toward the girl asleep on the cot. She was the proof. 4 years ago we heard crying in the canyon. We thought it was another trick, but it was real Lily, alone, half-starved. She told us she'd been following the voices when she wandered from her family's campsite. They promised to lead her back, but they didn't. Laura's breath caught. And she survived with you. We kept her alive, Mark said, but she's never stopped hearing them. That's why she sings. She says it keeps the voices away. As if on cue, Lily shifted in her sleep, humming louder, her tiny fingers tightening on her doll. Laura swallowed hard. Mark, what are you saying? That someone kept you there on purpose? Mark leaned forward, his voice fierce. Yes. Something out there. Maybe people. Maybe not, I don't know. But they wanted us to stay. And they let us live only because we played by their rules. The room seemed colder then, the fluorescent light humming like static. Jacob sat up fully now, his expression haunted. Mom, when Dad says rules, he means it. We couldn't go past certain ridges. Whenever we tried, things happened. Storms out of nowhere, trees falling, animals driving us back. We learned fast. We stayed in our canyon, and we stayed alive. Laura's rational mind rebelled. Yellowstone was wilderness, unpredictable, vast. Accidents happened. Storms happened. But the conviction in her husband's and son's voices gnawed at her. What about food? She asked softly, as though buying herself time. Mark's face hardened. The first months were hardest. Hunting, fishing, foraging. But sometimes food just appeared. Dried meat, herbs, even tools left near our shelter when we woke, like someone was making sure we had just enough to last. Laura stared at him. That's impossible. Jacob shook his head. I don't care if it sounds crazy. It happened. Lily's eyes fluttered open then, dark and solemn. She looked directly at Laura. They don't like it when you talk about them. Laura's blood ran cold. Who, Lily? She whispered. The people in the trees. The girl's voice was steady, matter-of-fact, as if she were explaining the rules of a game. They watched us. All the time. They said if we ever tried to leave, they'd find us again. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Laura pulled Lily into her arms, her hand trembling as she stroked the girl's hair. You're safe now. They can't hurt you here. But Lily shook her head against her chest. They know we're gone. They'll come. The following morning, Mark refused interviews. He wouldn't sit for the cameras, wouldn't smile for the news crews outside. When asked, he said only, not yet. Jacob was restless, pacing his hospital room, agitated by the beeping machines. He begged for the outdoors, the fresh air, the sound of running water. Doctors warned patience. But Laura could see it. He was caged. And Lily clung to her doll, singing louder every time someone mentioned going home. That afternoon, as Laura stepped into the hallway for coffee, she overheard 2 nurses whispering. They survived 7 years out there, one said. And not a single bear attack, no frostbite, no serious illness. The other shook her head. Miraculous or something else. Laura carried the coffee back, her stomach twisting. That night, when the hospital finally quieted, Mark pulled her close again. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. They'll want us to tell the survival story. And we will. But Laura, you need to believe me. There's more. And it's not finished. Her heart pounded. What do you mean, not finished? Mark's gaze was sharp, haunted. Because if they kept us alive for 7 years, it wasn't kindness. It was purpose. And they don't let go. Laura felt the weight of his words pressing down like the shadow of the canyon itself. Purpose, she whispered. What purpose? Mark looked at the sleeping forms of Jacob and Lily. His voice dropped to a rasp. They didn't just keep us alive. They were preparing us for what I don't know. But if they followed us out... He broke off, his eyes darting to the hospital window as if expecting shapes among the trees beyond. Then this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The press called it the Yellowstone miracle. Television anchors used words like unprecedented and unimaginable. Survival experts debated endlessly, asking how 4 people could endure so long in the backcountry with only makeshift tools and instinct. To the world, it was a story of hope. But to Laura, it was a story of unfinished business. She lay awake in the quiet of her Bozeman apartment weeks after the hospital release, listening to the sound of her family breathing in the next room. Mark, restless. Jacob, turning in his sheets. Lily, humming her campfire song even in sleep. Anna, whispering into her journal late at night. They were home. And yet, something still felt unfinished, like a book with pages torn out. Mark had begun physical therapy, relearning how to move in a world of sidewalks and traffic lights. Jacob struggled most with the return. He hated the constant buzz of phones, the glare of streetlights, the noise of televisions. He asked to go outside constantly, not to parks or neighborhoods, but to places where trees swallowed the sky. Lily was a puzzle. Her parents had flown in from Sacramento, their faces streaked with tears when they finally embraced her. She clung to them politely but distantly, her eyes flicking always toward Mark and Jacob. 4 years in the wilderness had made them her family. Now she was caught between 2 worlds, blood and bond. Laura tried to hold it all together. She cooked dinners, she filled out paperwork, she fielded calls from reporters and lawyers. But in the dark, when she looked at Mark across the kitchen table, she saw it in his face. He was still in the canyon. One evening, as summer shadows lengthened across the yard, Mark finally spoke what had haunted him for weeks. They didn't just let us go, he said. His voice was low, careful, as though the walls themselves might be listening. We were allowed to leave, chosen to leave. Laura's hands tightened around her coffee mug. Why us? Why you? Mark shook his head slowly. I don't know. But I can't stop thinking they let us survive for a reason. We were part of something bigger. And maybe we still are. Jacob overheard from the doorway. His voice cracked. Dad, don't talk about them. That's how they find us again. Lily began humming louder, clutching her doll, her gaze fixed on the tree line outside the window. Laura reached for her son. Jacob, you're safe. You're home. No one's coming for you. But Jacob's hands trembled. You don't know that. Silence stretched across the room, heavy as stone. In the weeks that followed, counselors urged them to separate reality from trauma. You created rules in the wilderness to survive, one therapist explained. Those rules don't apply here. But Mark only nodded politely, saying nothing. Later, when they were alone, he whispered to Laura, what if the rules apply everywhere? The question gnawed at her. Autumn arrived. Anna returned to college, her camera always at her side. Though her subjects had changed faces of resilience, families of the missing. She told her mother she wanted to study trauma psychology. If we survive this, I need to help others survive too. Laura hugged her tightly. Pride mingled with sorrow. Her daughter had grown up too fast. Jacob tried school again but lasted only a week. The crowded hallways, the constant chatter, it overwhelmed him. He dropped out, opting instead for wilderness programs run by veterans. He wanted to teach survival skills, to pass on what had kept him alive. It's the only place I feel like myself, he told his mother. Lily remained quiet, caught between her old family and her new one. She attended therapy with her parents, but she still called Mark dad sometimes, and Jacob brother. The Chens didn't correct her. They were just grateful to have her heartbeat in their arms. And Mark Mark grew thinner, his eyes shadowed. At night, Laura often woke to find him standing at the window, staring into the dark backyard, as if expecting something to move between the trees. One night in October, she rose quietly and stood beside him. "What are you looking for?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Not what? Who?" Her heart stumbled. "Mark." He placed a hand on the glass. "Sometimes when it's quiet, I can still hear them. Not voices exactly. More like waiting, watching." Laura wanted to deny it, to pull him back into the warmth of their bed, into the safety of ordinary life. But when she looked into his eyes, she knew the wilderness had branded him in ways she couldn't erase. Weeks later, a package arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo grainy, taken in the trees near Yellowstone. 4 figures stood barely visible. A man, a boy, a girl, and another smaller shape. Laura's stomach twisted. It was them. Mark, Jacob, Lily. But the timestamp read 2019, 2 years after they'd vanished, when no one should have been able to find them. Tucked inside the envelope was a note, written in block letters. "You don't leave the canyon. The canyon leaves you." Laura burned it in the sink before Mark could see, but the smoke curled into her lungs and refused to leave. Still, life went on. Thanksgiving arrived. Neighbors dropped pies at the door. Reporters left messages begging for interviews. Laura set the table for 4, though her heart counted 5, 6, 7. They bowed their heads, said grace, and passed the turkey. Laughter returned in small bursts. Anna told stories from school. Jacob cracked a joke about canned cranberry sauce. Lily giggled, her song quiet for once. For a brief moment, Laura let herself believe they were whole again. But when she cleared the dishes, she caught Mark's reflection in the kitchen window eyes, scanning the dark yard, shoulders tense, as though he knew something she didn't. Later that night, as snow began to fall, Laura sat beside him and whispered, "Will we ever be free of it?" Mark's jaw tightened. He took her hand, his grip firm but trembling. "We survived," he said. "But freedom, I don't know if that's what they gave us." Outside, the snowflakes swirled silently against the glass. And somewhere, deep in the wilderness that had once swallowed them whole, the trees stood tall, silent, and watching. The story of the Miller family is more than a tale of survival in the wilderness. It is a mirror held up to our deepest fears and our strongest hopes. At its heart, this narrative forces us to ask, what do we cling to when everything familiar is stripped away? Mark, Jacob, and Lily endured 7 years in the shadows of Yellowstone, cut off from the world they once knew. What kept them alive wasn't only fire, food, or shelter. It was the unbreakable bond of love, the refusal to surrender hope, and the simple, stubborn act of believing that tomorrow could still come. For Laura and Anna, the story became a different kind of survival. They lived through absence, grief without closure, and the daily ache of questions with no answers. Their resilience reminds us that waiting, too, is a form of courage. While the wilderness tested the bodies of those lost, time tested the souls of those left behind. This story carries a universal message for all of us. Life will not always follow the maps we draw. Trails vanish, storms break, voices echo in the silence. But even in the darkest canyons, there is a thread that can pull us forward: faith in one another, and the love that refuses to die. For audiences, the Miller family's ordeal is not just entertainment. It is an invitation to cherish the family sitting across from us at dinner tables, to honor the strength of children who adapt in ways we cannot imagine, and to recognize that hope is not passive. It is active, persistent, and often the very thing that keeps us alive. Their story reminds us, survival is not simply about enduring the wilderness. It is about never letting the wilderness take away who we are.